In this segment, Richard Dawkins, the famed evolutionary biologist, zoologist, and author, is apparently endorsing the culture associated with Christianity in the face of rising Muslim populations around the world. The author of The God Delusion has taken a hard-lined approach to insisting that gods are essentially made up. But could this hard line actually be softening as he advocates for the cultural aspects of Christianity? Scott, can you elaborate more on this article? What's Dawkins talking about?
Sure. So, we've all heard of Richard Dawkins. He's well known in addition to the scientific credentials you mentioned, but he's a well known in the atheist community. In fact, he's maybe the most famous atheist, if not the most famous. Then he's definitely up there. So he's well known for his criticism of religion. So he was on British Talk Radio recently, where he was talking about his religious experiences and so on. And although he was happy about the decline of Christianity, he still, it was kind of like he said, there was still a soft spot for it in his heart. He called himself a cultural Christian. But then he specifically said he started disparaging Islam in exchange for these, puffing up Christianity. He said that Christianity was, quote unquote, fundamentally decent when compared to Islam. And that's kind of a double standard. It seems like what's good for the goose is not good for the gander with Mr. Dawkins here. He's condemning things like, or he's downplaying and dismissing celebrations like Ramadan while holding up how precious and celebrated Christmas is and things like that. And his comments have not only just kind of tipped his hand a little bit about what his real approach is, but he's also it's kind of fanning the flames of anti-Islam sentiments in Europe, and especially in the current political climate. His failure to extend the same level of nuance and understanding to all these different religions, I think, puts his credibility in question, and his credibility as a critic of religious extremism and of intolerance. The article, by the way, was written by Hemant Mehta at The Friendly Atheist on April 2nd, 2024.
A wonderful Hemant Mehta, great material. Yes. I want to unpack this idea that Christianity is fundamentally decent, or at least more fundamentally decent. And I think that that's something that I want to get back to later, because I can't just gloss over it and ignore that for the time being. But I do want to first pay attention to this idea that maybe Dawkins has a point. I don't know. Are we as Westerners, especially us as Americans, more inclined to identify with Christianity? Or is it the case that we as skeptics, and let me backtrack. Are we more inclined to identify or have more in common with Christianity than we do with Islam? That's an important piece. Or is it the case that as skeptics, we don't agree or conform in any way to either of them? Does Dawkins deserve a little bit of credit here, Scott? What do you think?
Well, I think that, you hear people talk about how you take credit for your successes and you blame others for your failures, right? And I think we're kind of seeing a little bit of that here. You mentioned, what are we used to? I can speak for myself. I was raised in a Christian family. I did have the opportunity to live in a community, predominantly Muslim community. So I have a little bit of experience from a couple different directions, but yeah, I mean, it's when you're a child, when you're growing up, I mean, you get used to things, you develop positive associations with many things. And like so many of us, I remember going to church. I remember being with my family. I remember my parents pitching that as a positive thing. That, if you want to grow up to be good, you need to go to church. You have to follow these rules. You have to, be this kind of person if you want to be happy. And like anybody else, I want to satisfy my, I want my parents to be proud of me. I want my parents to be happy. And so is he justified, or is he, I mean, I can understand where he's coming from, but I think the emphasis should be more on the skepticism. I think that much of what Richard Dawkins talks about is how we can so easily fall accept things that make us feel good, about the warm, fuzzy feeling, emotional responses. And he's written much about how we should be careful of that, because that can be misleading. We know our emotions can lead us down these wrong paths. And so it seems, I don't know, it seems like it's a disconnect in his mind, but it's a normal human disconnect. It's we all do it, and to some extent. And I don't think he's necessarily bad. I do think he's a bad person for many other reasons, but for this in particular, I can't blame him for having positive memories of his childhood.
Sure. And
but I think he needs to take that extra step and make sure that the skepticism is the last word in what he says. Yeah,
right. It's easy to get lost in our history that we couldn't help. Right. We're brought up in these families and these customs and cultures that we really are powerless to change. And so we're kind of stuck with them until we, make these small baby steps, like, perhaps we're doing just by having this conversation. Eli, just because our language and our phrases in English or in Western society are riddled with Christian influence, does that make us culturally Christian?
I kind of understand what he's saying. I get what he's trying to describe. I don't know if culturally Christian is the best way to describe it. I did it first, and then I kind of changed my stance on it a little bit. I can relate a lot to what he's saying. Earlier today, like, somebody messaged me and asked me about like my thoughts on what happens when you die. And I summarized it by saying basically like, the body that I used while I was alive becomes energy for other living things, basically. And then I went and looked at it later, and I didn't say while I was alive. I said while I was here. Like, I don't believe in a there. I don't think that there is one. So so for me to say here is a product of the Christianity that I was raised in. And I think the sort of the language and the imagery and the ideas that are just so saturated in society. I think it was just, I didn't think about it while I was typing it. And I just went back and read it later, and I was like, that's so weird. And especially like thinking, like knowing that we were going to be recorded, like doing this article today. And I was like, this is so strange that this is happening to me. And to call it culturally Christian, again, I don't know what's the best way to describe it, but I absolutely relate to having the mechanisms or the isms, you could say, the Christianisms kind of ingrained into just your habits. I say things like, oh my God, and thank God.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue, because I want to kind of talk about some of the things that we pick up and we keep with us. Dawkins talks about celebrating, Christian holidays and things like that. Do those Christians that are so inclined to celebrate Christmas, for example, does that actually make them a little bit pagan or ancient Roman? Because that's where all of those customs were stolen from. It's just a fun mental gymnastics to play, because nothing is fundamentally Christian. Even Islam takes its roots from Judaism, and so it's nothing really is owned by any one sect of the Abrahamic religions. And that's where I kind of want to turn to infidel on, because I mentioned earlier that I wanted to get back to this idea that Dawkins says that when you compare Christianity with Islam, that Christianity is the fundamentally decent religion, or maybe more decent religion. Infidel, I know just by knowing you that you cannot possibly agree that Christianity is more decent. What is it that Dawkins is getting wrong? And should we have a preference between Mosaic law or Sharia law, for example? I mean, what should we be more concerned with?
Well, yeah, it's a little funny when you bring up Christmas and how some Christians, to make them a little bit pagan if they celebrate Christmas. Well, I was raised in a Christian sect that didn't celebrate Christmas. It was too pagan for us. So I think that when it comes down to fundamentally decent, I think that Dawkins is looking at a far more sanitized view of Christianity than I say most of us here in the United States are first looking at as well. What I look, and of course, once again, it goes back to personal experience. I think that Dawkins has allowed himself to be lulled to sleep by church bells and forgotten that the doctrine that stands behind it, whether it's the cathedrals he's talking about or the places that I went to growing up. This fundamentally decent Christianity has been used to establish a patriarchy, to give an excuse for people to abuse and beat their children, subjugate their wives and women. LGBTQ is an abomination according to them. All these others and all these other people that I don't think it's going to make a lot of difference to them in history, whether it was Sharia law or Mosaic law. Right now, for me, I'm concerned about Mosaic law because it's the one that's at my front door right now. And so I understand that if we had a fundamental change of people saying, hey, let's put Sharia law into play, I'd be like, we have a problem here. But last I checked, we had Moses Mikey Johnson in our Speaker of the House, and not somebody who's trying to push Sharia law. So with that in mind, yeah, okay. I think both of them are just about equally terrible. I think that for up until the last 50 years or so, Christianity had been moving towards a more liberalized view. We've seen something a lot different than that in the last decade to 20 years. So right now, for me, yes, it's definitely Mosaic law, my number one concern, and I see nothing fundamentally decent about what we're talking about here.
Right. And we know just based on the tenets of Christian and Hebrew law that, some major atrocities have taken place that their followers are completely fine with. And we know that Christianity at its core is going to be something that is damaging to society. We've got this long period called the Middle Ages where people were burned at the stake for being witches or for being atheists, for being homosexuals, you name it. This kind of thing unchecked really can destroy a society. And that brings me to the point where I kind of want to turn to Scott and get some clarification, because I know that you feel maybe we shouldn't be too hard on people, but we shouldn't be too soft on their religion either. And so I'm kind of wondering, where is the dividing line between the rules of a religion and the people carrying out the instructions of said religion? I mean, how do we approach that?
Right. And that's a great question. Before I answer that, I want to give kudos to Eli. I thought that was a great story that you shared about your self-reflection. I think it's a good reminder that as atheists, it's important that we also look in the mirror too, and that we assess ourselves, and that we make sure that we're holding ourselves to the same standard as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
But to build on what Jimmy, what you and Infidel were saying about the fundamental nature of this religion, I think that's one of the things that's most asinine about what Dawkins has been saying. I think that's the real problem, is he's kind of glossing that over. I mean, fundamentally, religions are irrational beliefs. And so that's the problem. And so much of what Dawkins has written is about specifically that. And I think you were asking specifically about the distinction between the people and the religion. I think that's the problem there. I think that's part of what is pulling him in that emotional direction is his attachment to people. But I think that that's why he needs to apply it fairly. Okay. If he's going to look at the people of one religion, then he has to compare those to the people of the other religion. Just like any other, division of humanity, we're going to have good people and bad people. We're going to have a mixture. We're going to have people in how many different ways are the Bible interpreted, right? We're going to have people going all over the place, starting with the same material. And so if you're going to judge based off of what the people are doing, then at least be magnanimous and at least be fair about it. On the flip side of that, we have the religion, and we can't be lifting up a religion because you like the people that are involved in that. I think the religion aspect of it needs to be that's where we need to be focusing our critique. That's where we need to be criticizing. That's where Richard Dawkins needs to be remembering his skepticism. And so the line should be between, you hear this saying come from many different directions: love the sinner, hate the sin, that kind of thing. Criticize the action or the tenets, and respect and love the person. And so I think that we need to, if we're going to criticize a religion, then criticize the religion. If you want to feel good about the people, then feel good about the people. I think that's the decision there. That's the line that you were looking for, is where the rubber meets the road, where the theology meets the practicality. I think that's where that distinction has to be made. And I would like to see Richard Dawkins, who presents himself as a skeptic, take that approach as well.
Right. And, you mentioned that you don't have a lot of respect for Richard Dawkins for other things that he said, but he's potentially a fine biologist or zoologist, barring some anti gender comments that he's made. I shouldn't say anti-gender, but transgender, excuse me, anti-transgender comments that he's made. He's not a very good historian either, as we can tell. He has no idea what he's talking about when it comes to the nature of Christianity. And I'm not even sure that we should even really care, or at least, Eli, I don't think that you have a high opinion of Dawkins' opinion. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so he of course is very influential. Scott made this point earlier. He was extremely influential to me when I was coming into my atheism, and probably to all of us and to many, many people. And as well as I've gone on to start learning about biology, a lot of what I now can remember is I remember hearing him say as well. So the thing is that I don't agree with them. I don't think Christianity is fundamentally good. In fact, the fundamentalists are the ones that I was hoping were going to get raptured during the eclipse last Monday, because I was really looking forward to that kind of being done with. But that aside, even though I don't agree with him, and that's the reason that that's not the reason that I don't care, but it's essentially just that he's not dogmatically significant to atheism. We don't need Richard Dawkins we don't need to agree with everything Richard Dawkins says. So yeah, that's what I thought. It's not that I don't care. I think that if it weren't for his opinions about the things he has said about transgender, things like that, I probably would give a little more weight to what he has to say. I'd be maybe, but that doesn't change the fact that I don't think that it's right to begin with. And his opinion about religion is just like his opinion about gender and opinion, and it's irrelevant.
Okay. Well, getting back to this idea of cultural Christianity, I want to harken back to something that Infidel said earlier, and then give everybody a chance to wrap up. But Infidel, you said you're more concerned with Mosaic law than you are with Sharia law, because Mosaic law is what's on your doorstep. But is it potentially our inclination to align with those Mosaic roots through Christianity that keeps Sharia law and Islam from encroaching upon our doorstep? I mean, are we choosing subconsciously Christianity over something far worse?
I don't think so. I think that we're selling ourselves short if we accept that, Christianity is the lesser of evil, so that's what I'm going to go with. This reminds me of Hersey Ali, who had became an atheist and really hates Islam, and I understand for very good personal reasons, with knowing her life, some of her life experiences. But now she's converted over to Christianity, and it's more of sounds like a political change than actual spiritual change, and that's what I see him doing here. And I'm not interested in going that route. I think that as a society, if we have any hope of doing things better than we have in the past, we're going to have to find new ways to do those. And I don't think that recycling the hat trick from 2,000 years ago is going to do that, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. I think it's time we try something new. And I definitely believe, and maybe I'm being too hopeful, but I believe that we can definitely do better.
Absolutely. Scott, 30 seconds, closing comments. The floor is yours.
Well, I think one of the advantages of ascribing to a philosophy that's not authoritarian gives us the freedom to criticize our so-called leaders, right? And so I'm happy for that. I think Richard Dawkins needs to put his money where his mouth is. I think he needs to, if he wants to be a leader in the skeptic community, I think he needs to be more skeptical. And I would like to, I would like to see him put the focus back on where at least I thought it was once. Maybe that can't happen. Maybe it can. I don't know.
Sure. Eli?
Mostly just that, as influential as he was, I don't think that one opinion he has about religion in an interview that he did is worth its own headline. And, much like Infidel was saying, and I had the point a second ago, and I was trying to catch it there and I just lost it, but I can end it with that. I don't think that the one comment he made about religion there is worth its own headline. It just goes back to it didn't really matter.
Sure. And I want to highlight what Scott had to say about you sharing your story earlier, because it shows what we're all about here at the ACA and on the nonprofits, because you were just casually reinvestigating your preconceived notions, right? And that is a work in progress. It's a constant work in progress being a skeptic, to challenge the things you think you know, to admit you were wrong, or to kind of get to the root cause of why you think the way that you think, rather than just giving up and accepting what people tell you. And so I'm really glad that you were able to share that. You had a real life scenario that happened, recently.
Hours ago.
Yeah, really. And, it was fitting for this show and for what we stand for. So if you want to see more of what we stand for, go ahead and click the link below.